been about 10 years since I've had air conditioning on this car, and after I did the H22 swap I wanted to add it back in. However, I wanted to use as many universal parts as I could, and also do custom lines that are more tucked and out of the way. This isn't going to be a step-by-step video, but more of an informational video showing what I did, and giving you the info you need to know if you want to do something similar. The AC compressor is just one for an H22. To use a single wire compressor, you have to do a single wire wiring conversion. You also need a 1-pin plug, but I couldn't find a good aftermarket source for them, so you have to cut one off a junkyard car. In the description I'll have a link to a video covering the single wire conversion, but you can't use the plug in that video, it's the wrong plug. I'll be using a stock 3rd gen evaporator that I've refreshed. I'll have a video for that in the description. The rest of the system will be custom. I'm using a universal 21 by 12 inch condenser. This style has a built-in dryer on the side there that'll help keep the plumbing simple. I was a bit conservative with the width. In the description I'll have a link for a 23 inch wide one. I think that'll fill out the gap better. These condensers come with mounting holes, but I found some of my spare end-link bushings, and they just happen to fit into the recess on each end tank, so I just used them to mount it. Here's what it looks like mounted. Okay, what you need to know about the AC hose and the AC fittings is that they come in numbered sizes: 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. The Prelude uses 6, 8, and 10. Okay, you have two options for hose: standard barrier and reduced barrier. Reduced barrier has the same inner diameter, but the outer diameter is smaller. I'm using the reduced barrier because it looks cleaner and it's easier to route through tight places. When you buy the fittings, you have to use the right type for the type of hose you have. You can't use standard fittings on reduced barrier hose. For the sealing surface, you want to use an O-ring type, not a flared. For the compressor suction fitting, I'm using this aftermarket one that has a built-in filter. For the discharge fitting, I had no choice but to buy a whole line, then cut the fitting off. The suction fitting is going to have number 10 threads welded onto it, and the discharge fitting is going to have number 8 threads welded onto it. Here's after welding. Because there's a tight clearance with the alternator bracket, I cut the weld-on fittings down as short as I could before I welded them on. Luckily, the 3rd gen evaporator box uses standard threads, number 10 on top, number 6 below. When you're planning your line routing, remember you can bend the fittings a few degrees in either direction, just don't take it too far. The stock 3rd gen pressure switch mounts onto the dryer, but since I'm not using that dryer, I had to weld in a switch port. This new switch port has a Schrader valve in it, so I can remove the pressure switch without discharging the system. I'm also using a universal pressure switch, not the stock one. The fittings have a small view hole so you can see that the hose is fully seated. Once I had them all mocked up on the car, I made a little dot with a paint pen on the hose that lines up with that hole, so I know that, so when I take them off the car I can see that they're still in the right orientation before I crimp them. Here's me using the tool to crimp all the lines. If you're going to buy a tool, make sure it has the right dies for the type of hose you're going to use, either standard barrier or reduced barrier. Okay, I just dumped a ton of info, so let me just show you how I routed all the lines. Coming out of the discharge port of the compressor is a number 8 line that goes to the top of the condenser. Coming out of the bottom of the condenser is a number 6 line. That runs all the way to the bottom port on the evaporator. I added the switch port to the 180-degree fitting that's coming out of the condenser. The number 6 going to the evaporator and the number 10 coming back from it are routed along the bottom of the radiator, around the side of the transmission, and up to the evaporator box. The number 6 and the number 10 fittings I used at the evaporator box have the charge ports on them. And if it wasn't clear, that number 10 coming out of the top of the evaporator runs to the suction port on the compressor. This is the fitting that has a tight clearance with the alternator bracket, and I even actually shaved down the bracket a little bit with the grinder. You can kind of see how close it is in this picture. That's about it. The AC's been working really great in this car. This was just a quick overview of some things you need to know. I'm going to have a link to my build thread in the description which goes into more detail. I'll also have links to all the fittings and components I used, as well as any related videos.